We talk a lot about balance, but a balanced mix is often like a boring mix. Some of the most interesting music ever, the volume balance is like pretty aggressive or lopsided, or the snare is ridiculously loud, or you have a lot more creative freedom than you might think. We can start with the first thing, which we could kind of define as objective standards. And I guess the theme of this is going to be objectivity versus like subjectivity. We're going to spend a lot of time focusing on the subjective part and talking about emotion. But before you get to that part, it is helpful to know what the objective standards are. So it's relatively straightforward. Like when I think about objectivity and we're thinking a lot more about mastering, we can look at low end in our PAS analyzer. We can look at like volume and LUFS and make sure we're hitting those targets. So this is actually really dynamic, minus 11, compared to Selena Gomez. Let's have a look at that. Pretty different. And then something, this will probably be in the middle. Yeah, so then it's like, okay, what are we going for? Are we going for crushed pop, or are we going for like a little bit more dynamic range? These are two tracks that did incredibly well, and they're very dynamic. And I'm always going to lean on that end of the spectrum, again, unless the client has specifically asked for a very loud master. Generally, my approach is push it as much as I can before I feel like there is a degradation in quality. When I'm mastering, I'm always looking to actually make it sound better and louder. A lot of the time, if you're going for volume, you're normally making compromises. So you might, A/B your pre and post master, and your post master is way louder, but if you volume matched it, it sounds worse. That's very common because you push the limiter, all these things like affect it. It will sound more squash. What I try and do is beat it in both regards. Like obviously I want it to be louder, but if I actually A/B, and there's plugins you can use, like Reference does that. You can put it at the start of your mastering chain and at the end, and then you can A/B, and I want it to sound better as well as being louder. So we put Reference send at the start, and then we've got Reference at the very end. Then we can do our mastering. So if I just do like a very quick and dirty master here, bit of compression, and then let's just go straight into our limiter, go to our loudest section. Cool, so minus 8.9, let's just say we're happy with that. Normally I would obviously do a lot more processing, but then my goal is that when I go back and forth here, so this is the before, this is the after. So we have lost a little bit of that depth, but normally I would also be doing a bunch of sweetening, run it through a Pultec, run it, whatever, massive, passive, like all of those things. I want it to actually sound better and be louder.
Even at match.
Even at match volume. And then that for me is confirmation that I haven't made any like major sacrifices just in the name of volume, which I don't feel like is necessary, unless you have a client who's like, I want this to be loud. Then that's a different game. If the client wants it to be loud, then it's probably going to sound worse level matched because you're making sacrifices to achieve volume. Yeah. But I think generally, I try not to do that. Anyway, so that's a big part of it. And then equally, those just again, bring it back to the concept here of like objective standards, checking the low end. You can use PAS Analyzer. I use Reference a lot for this because it will just show you. So we're in the ballpark. So compared to this one, we're up, and this basically shows you how loud you are relative. So we were up close to like a lot louder. But this is why it's really important to have multiple references, because compared to the Daft Punk track, we're like very close. So, and I like how it sounds, so I could leave that how it is. But again, especially when you're working in an untreated room, I do that a lot, like look at the low end. And again, that's something that's a little bit more objective than subjective. But that's pretty much as far as it goes in terms of objectivity. Beyond that, there's such a wide range of what is acceptable. And again, this is where it gets really tricky with references, making sure you don't try and like copy stuff, and recognizing you can actually have a track that's incredibly warm, incredibly bassy, incredibly aggressive in the upper mid range, and you compare it to one or two references and you might be like, wait, this is way out of whack. But actually, if you compared it to like 20 references, you'd realize there's some stuff out there that is pretty out of whack, and that's perfectly okay if it suits the ultimate goal, which is emotion. So moving on now to the second thing, which is recognizing that ultimately emotion is the goal. If we're talking about mixing now, and even mastering, there's room for that concept. We think a lot about like mastering as like highly technical and just making sure we're getting it across the finish line, but there is room for optimizing emotion in mastering for sure, just obviously at a high level. But as we move into mixing, that's where it becomes predominantly about emotion. And what does that actually mean? Because that's obviously quite amorphous, right? Like mix for emotion.
Emotion being at any one point in the song, whatever's like the major driver of the emotion, having that be at the forefront and having other things that may be competing either out or down enough to not impede that emotion.
So like volume automation for like swells, that kind of stuff, contrast, going from bridges versus into choruses, maintaining the focus, the spotlight on the stage. What else?
Distance and like intention with making things wet versus dry, and
so contrast in space as well as contrast in volume.
I know in choruses I like to look for additional width. If there's something that I can take wider.
Mm-hmm.
You
know. I'm thinking about like what is the journey here overall, and then what is each section? Why does it exist? Like what is it there for? And if there's lyrics, I'm listening to the lyrics.
So this is interesting. We've got lots here that speaks to kind of movement throughout the song, creating contrast between sections, contrast in volume, space, width, identifying the primary emotion, the narrative, listening to the lyrics. These are all, I guess, what we could call kind of like dynamic elements of emotion, like how the story progresses through the track. How do you guys think about kind of what we could call static emotion, or if that's kind of like horizontal emotion, like how does it progress? What about vertical emotion? What does that look like?
So placing things in the mix, like, well, is that kind of what you're referring to? Like as far as you want the hats kind of sitting up here, vocals sitting here?
That's part of it for sure. Like the overall volume balance, not just
a frequency thing. Like
frequencies. How, and elaborate, how do frequencies affect?
It's an upbeat pop sort of thing, and it's a feel good thing. We probably have, we're enhancing in the top end, high mids or something like that, 2000, 4000. If it's darker, if the tone is darker, the material is darker, we have less of that. We're making choices that support the spirit of the.
So we've got volume balance, frequencies. What else could we think of in that kind of vertical plane as impacting emotion? Dynamics?
Dynamics, yeah.
How would dynamics?
How punchy or flat something could be.
Yep. How would that effect feeling.
transientness? Like, yeah, is it bouncing or is it more kind of even keeled and smooth?
Yep, absolutely. And then
I mean, that what goes along with that, of course, is character, depending on what you're using, right? The control dynamics.
kind of like the relationship between different equipment, and I guess we could tie that back to like tone and frequencies. Well, yeah, I mean, so space, I think when you said about space, you were talking about that horizontal plane, but exactly, like in the vertical plane as well, it's like, how does a track feel when it's really dry and intimate and in your face versus big and open? And that could be like throughout, not just creating contrast between sections. What else? EQ, frequency versus like saturation. When something's clean, it's very different to extremely saturated.
You know, I watch and listen. So many people are really focused on saturation and they love it and using it in all these ways. And I have the tools, but I've never really gotten comfortable with the idea of intentionally introducing distortion to stuff. But I'm sure I don't work on certain genres where that's more appropriate.
It also adds more
overtones,
harmonics,
pleasing harmonic frequencies that are
you can do it with
besides the fundamental.
Have a listen to this. So this is from we recorded this in Vegas a couple of months ago. We had two versions. So we've got one that's called the Modern and the other one that's called Dark and Dirty. And I'll just flick back and forth between the two and again focus on like how it affects emotion. This is where it gets there's also this internal thing that has to happen, because it's easy to kind of like intellectualize emotion and think about like, oh, this is more saturated, therefore it should be a different emotion. But that's very different to like actually kind of like trying to like feel it, which is a lot more challenging. But try and like focus on that.
4 eyes, sentimental, defies his mom and dad. 4 eyes, sentimental, defies his mom and dad. Just died, it's been a little, I don't wanna talk about it. Just died, it's been a little, I don't wanna talk about it. You're close in my bedroom, you lie like you're getting paid. You're close in my bedroom, you lie like you're getting paid. Your body and like a real go-getter, it is what it is what it is. Like a real go-getter, it is what it is what it is. Last week was the worst week ever, nothing had changed, gonna break this curse. Last week was the worst week ever, nothing had changed, gonna break this curse. Hole in my heart and a hole in my sweater is what it is, just what it is. Hole in my heart and a hole in my sweater is what it is, just what it is. Is what it is.
Thoughts? How did it differ?
I just can't get comfortable with it. I just spent too much time trying to get rid of that problem.
Right. Well, yeah, there's kind of an interesting like historical thing there where it's like it used to be all about getting rid of the saturation and now it's all about adding it. But and then I think this is the most recent version.
It's gonna make it better. Nothing I do is gonna make it worse. Chewing on the curb like it's gonna make it better. Nothing I do is gonna.
Just even louder. Side note on this, it's like -4 LUFS because so basically it's just Decapitator on the mix bus.
Yeah.
But the client, well, I mean, this was Caleb's idea initially to do the two versions, so they preferred the Dark and Dirty.
That was interesting though. It's like one of them is sort of siding with the lyric. There's a juxtaposition, right? It's a kind of a feel good. If you didn't have any lyrics, it'd be you'd think it was a feel good song. But the lyrics tell you something else, right? And I love those kind of juxtapositions.
And this is where it gets into like just purely about artistic intent, because then it's like, are you trying to create juxtaposition? Is it the Smiths and you want it to be really bright and happy, but the lyrics are miserable? And then there's this whole other thing, and this takes me on to like the third thing I wanted to talk about, which is taste. And taste is almost like the culmination of, I guess it is more on the subjective side, because as soon as we start talking about subjectivity, so we've identified all the things that can influence emotion, but none of that helps you decide what emotion to influence. Now we know kind of like what our tools are to shape that, but you still need to have a direction to go in. And that's where it all ultimately comes back to taste. I think, especially as a mixing engineer or a mastering engineer, you could say as an artist, it's not just taste, it's also just like artistic intent, creativity. But I think when it comes to mixing and mastering, that becomes a really big element, because the decisions you make as a mixing engineer are going to be different to the decisions that someone else makes, or the decisions you make in your own music are going to be different to the decisions a mixing engineer would make. And that's going to be a culmination of what emotions you're trying to enhance, but also just your taste of what sounds good, what doesn't sound good, what you like, what you don't like. And I think that's something that takes years to build, and just lots of listening to different music and dissecting different music and trying different equipment. But it's incredibly important, and the more time goes on, the more I think about taste. And ultimately that's what it all kind of comes back to, because there's just so much that you can dig into, and so many things we could like argue about, right? What piece of gear is better, but like ultimately we're all just kind of stumbling around in the dark. Like there is no true kind of objective reference for any of this. Yes, we can say like there are objective references for LUFS, but even that is very genre dependent, or one person might say I prefer high dynamic range, another person might say, well, I like my mixes to be crushed. So we're all just kind of stumbling around in the dark ultimately. So then all you really can do is lean into like, well, what do I like? What's my taste for this stuff?
I sometimes think the ultimate reference is the cumulative sense of every commercial release you've ever heard that just lives in your bones, right? Because when something's off. Like, the reason I got into this program is because I could not get my recordings to sound quote unquote right? Mm-hmm. But then within that space, there's a dynamic too of just like we just heard. Both of those are acceptable commercial releases, but they're saying something different. Yeah. Right? So there's a spectrum, I guess. And
the spectrum is huge. If you're looking at like Paz Analyzer and comparing the frequency response, like there's some albums that did incredibly well that are like really poorly mixed. We talk a lot about balance, but a balanced mix is often like a boring mix. And some of the most interesting music ever is actually the volume balance is like pretty aggressive or lopsided, or the snare is ridiculously loud, or there's all this stuff that can be kind of crazy. And you have a lot more creative freedom than you might think. Obviously, when you're starting out, it's tricky because you kind of have to like get to this point where you're happy with the quality of it, and you feel like you're at least within the ballpark of professional, to move beyond that into actually kind of, it's like learning the rules before you break them. But I think there is a way to kind of like skip some of that and just really embrace even early on. Just embrace the uniqueness of it, and don't be so kind of have so much like doubt about the quality of it, and really just lean into the creative aspects. So yeah, any questions about taste?
I think you make a really good point, because general music, and there's probably people here that have like a music degree, and you study theory, in the first 3 years, or here's the theory, and the fourth year is now that you know the rules.
Right.
Here's how to break them, right?
And obviously this is why we teach mastering first, is you have to learn to use the tools. Like if you're a painter, it's going to be tricky to be creative and break the rules if you literally don't know how to hold a paintbrush. Or like every second you're like, I don't know what this is right here, like what knobs do I turn? But I think it's easy to get bogged down in that.
There's intentionality in breaking the rules too, though, right? Because like when you don't know any better, you're breaking the rules without intention.
That's a mistake.
Right.
It's not actually like, oh, I meant to do that. It's a I didn't know any better.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that before. Is like, how do you can rate all art on somewhat of an objective standard based on intent, and like and there is objective good and bad in all art, if you just look at the level of correlation between like the intent and the outcome. So that's a really good point. You do have to learn the rules before you break them. So just recap, it's kind of recognizing the objective standards, learning the rules, but then also realizing this is all completely subjective and you can do whatever the hell you want based on emotion, using all of these things to influence emotion, but also having an end destination that is going to be informed by taste. And then the last thing to kind of tie all of that together, I think, is really just having fun with it, basically. Because ultimately, like, why do we do any of this, really? Like, obviously, some of you might have kind of commercial intent and you want to do this as a living, but I think enjoying the process creates a better outcome. And this is where you can kind of deliberate stuff like getting a bunch of hardware and is it worth it or is it not worth it? But if it helps you enjoy the process and that helps you make more music and you have fun with it, then it helps you kind of loosen up, like be a lot less stiff about it. I think, especially again when you're learning and you're worrying about like, am I in the ballpark? What are the objective standards and the rules that maybe I don't know that I could be breaking? And you can like overthink and over intellectualize a lot of this, whereas if you just kind of step into that space of just like having fun with it, I think it really helps you kind of relax into it a little bit more, and then that lets you channel that creative side more easily.